Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you are watching this. Hello, we have people from over 90 countries with us already today. Fantastic to see so many of you joining us for this Frontiers Forum, exploring the last untouched ocean ecosystems with world-renowned marine conservationist and National Geographic Explorer in Residence, Dr. Enric Sala. I am not Dr. Sala, I am Greg Foote. Hello, I am a science journalist and a broadcaster from the UK, and I'm your host for today's virtual forum that is promising to take us on a journey around the globe to learn about the vibrant, thriving and harmonious coral reefs and marine life that do still exist without human exploitation. Today's conversation is part of the Frontiers Forum series organised by leading open access publisher Frontiers, and it perfectly encapsulates their mission to make science open so that scientists can collaborate better and innovate faster to deliver solutions that enable healthy lives on a healthy planet. It is hard to edit down the long list of experiences and successes that today's expert guest has into a brief introduction, so I hope you'll forgive a slightly longer bio today. Originally an academic marine ecologist, Dr. Sala grew increasingly frustrated with what he called writing the obituary of ocean life, and he decided to dedicate his career to finding effective ways to protect it. In 2008, he founded National Geographic's Pristine Seas initiative that has since helped establish now 29 of the largest marine protected areas in the world. They cover a total area of 6.8 million square kilometres. That's more than twice the size of India. Dr. Sala is, as I said, a National Geographic Explorer in Residence, and his work uniquely combines scientific exploration, rigorous research, and compelling media content to inspire governments, local communities, and Indigenous peoples to create these marine reserves. Dr. Sala's expeditions have led to remarkable findings, such as the discovery of an extraordinary abundance of deep-sea fish and previously undescribed deep coral systems off the coast of Colombia. And his team have documented the importance of underwater features like the Malpelo Ridge as crucial migratory pathworks for endangered species, including hammerhead sharks. We're going to kick off the virtual forum today with a 25-minute or so presentation from Dr. Sala, and then I'm going to join to put some of your questions to him. So do please keep those questions coming using the Zoom Q&A function. That is enough from me, I think. Enric, we are absolutely honoured to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity to talk to our wonderful friends from around the world. Everyone, thank you so much for joining today. And yes, I'll exploring the last untouched ocean ecosystems. And you might wonder, well, there are no untouched ocean ecosystems left on the planet, right? Our footprint is global. We've been everywhere. We can find plastic trash and aluminum cans even at the deepest part of the ocean, at the Marianas Trench. So what is this guy talking about? Well, if you look at our footprint all over the ocean, yes, indeed, we are everywhere. So just look at this map of the global shipping routes. Right? These are tracks over a few years of the major shipping routes around the world. So we are everywhere, polluting the ocean, both with CO2 emissions, nitrous emissions, noise pollution. And not only we are there with a presence and throwing things in the water, but also we are extracting a lot out of the ocean. And when we look at the map of the global fishing activity, the colored areas are the areas where there is industrial fishing. The lighter areas, the light greens and yellows, are the ones with the largest intensity of fishing. But you can see over half of the ocean is currently fished, targeted by industrial fleets. And these are the areas where most of the fish are. Right? The areas that are darker on the Arctic seas and the Southern Ocean are areas that are either too rough or not productive enough. So we have been everywhere. So is there any last untouched ocean ecosystems? And does it matter if we are in now this new world? Well, when I was a student at the University of Barcelona, this book came out, 1991, The Ecology of Fishes on Coral Reef, an edited book with chapters by the then most important coral reef fish researchers. And we all thought, wow, this is the ultimate volume. We can learn everything about how fishes work in the context of coral reefs. And when I got the book, I was so excited, but then looking at the index, there was something missing. The word shark wasn't there. Coral reefs, sharks were not mentioned a single time. And as far as I know, sharks are fishes. So what happened there? Later, as I finished my PhD and I was studying the impacts of human in the ocean, then I learned about this thing called the syndrome of the shifting baselines, which means that what we think is natural is probably not, because we have been studying places that are already degraded. Or we learn about the condition of a fishery when we join the fisheries department and see the statistics, which maybe started only 5 or 10 years before, right? So we started degrading the ocean far before we had that personal experience. And usually we tend to associate that personal childhood experience or the first professional experience as our baseline, as the benchmark, the starting point. But clearly, already in 1991, we knew that there was something wrong about our understanding of coral reefs. And coral reefs are one of the most popular and the most studied ecosystems on the planet. Imagine the same issue with the shifting baselines for the deep sea, or kelp forest in remote places, or remote seagrass beds, or seamounts. Right? So this problem happens everywhere. But here today I want to focus on coral reefs as an example of what can we learn if we really know how these ocean ecosystems are in the absence of human impacts. This shifting baseline syndrome doesn't just happen among scientists. Everybody has it. There is a country in the Caribbean that they themselves proclaim that they are one of the top 10 diving destinations in the world. You go to their website, and this is what they advertise. Little anemones, little crabs, sand eels, sponges. This is a place where there used to be Caribbean reef sharks, tiger sharks, Nur sharks, lemon sharks, Goliath grouper, black grouper, yellowfin grouper, Nassau grouper, Cubera snappers, the big midnight parrotfish, the big rainbow parrotfish. They don't advertise them because they are gone. And people who started these diving businesses didn't know that these species were missing because they were missing before they started their businesses. So this shifting baseline, this misunderstanding of what's an amazing marine ecosystem are really misleading. So after 10 years as a professor at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, as Greg mentioned before, I decided to stop writing death notices for the ocean, to stop writing the obituaries, and go and work on the cure to the disease, trying to bring back the ocean, to revive our ocean. So I started conducting expeditions to some of the most remote places in the ocean, places without people, without fishing, places that haven't been targeted even by the long distance water fleets. This atoll here, this coral atoll, is one of the northernmost atolls in the Republic of the Marshall Islands in the Western Pacific. It's really remote. It took me longer to go from Washington, D.C., from here to this place than it took for the Apollo astronauts to reach the moon. Actually, it took me 1 day more. And this is an example of a place that is like a time machine. It is truly an untouched ocean ecosystem. Yes, it is affected by ocean warming and by acidification, yet it is not affected by fishing, direct pollution, noise pollution, coastal development, habitat destruction, and all these other areas that can be abated by us. What did we find here? Well, the first thing we found is that book was wrong. That book was missing something very important, which is the top predators. This is the normal dive at that remote atoll on the northern Marshall Islands. There was this pass that connects the lagoon with the open ocean. That was the only pass in that atoll. And every single day, all day long, there were 200 sharks, mostly gray reef sharks, but also some white tip reef sharks. This is what's natural on an untouched coral atoll. We knew that there were more sharks in the past from historical records, but until we started going to these remote places that are near pristine, we didn't know that there were so many predators. And this is me being very, very happy, enjoying one of these most incredible underwater experiences. But not only the sharks are abundant, all the predators are abundant. And that's the number one thing that we learned by going to these untouched ecosystems. The first one is that the predators rule. Predators are not only common, they are abundant, and all the predatory species are in these places. That's what we are missing in most of the ocean. This is a giant grouper, also Pacific giant grouper, that was also missing from that book. In addition to groupers, we have twin spot snappers that are very abundant and also more curious and aggressive, I would say, than the sharks. Sharks, we've dived with thousands of sharks all around the world, and we've never had a problem. They actually get bored after a few minutes and they go and do their things. There are also other large predators like the bumphead wrasse, the Napoleon wrasse, that has been extirpated from around the Pacific, schools of giant trevally. And when one dives in if you now go to any place in the Caribbean, it's very difficult to see these large animals. If you go to any place in the Pacific that is not protected, it's very difficult to see these large Napoleon wrasses. They can be as large as the windscreen of a car. And these species have been targeted locally, but also by the Asian appetite for live reef fish, but also for the lips of this wonderful creature. Not only the predators are abundant, but actually they are dominant. When in school we learned that the ecosystem, when you look at the biomass, at the weight of the different levels on the food chain, we were told that, like in the African plains, there are lots of herbivores, huge biomass, hundreds of thousands of zebras and antelopes and gazelles, and just a few hundred lions or leopards. We thought that that was also the rule in coral reefs. But what we found is that when we go to these coral reefs that are near pristine, and we weight all of the reef fish together, the sharks and the top predators account for most of the biomass. This is a bar graph showing the biomass of fish, reef fish, including sharks, across different places in the Pacific. The colored bars are the ones from the atoll I showed you on that first picture. And the gray ones are from other places. The half left are places that are uninhabited and fully protected. And the right half are places that are inhabited and unprotected. And they are the places where most of the scientific studies on coral reefs have been conducted in the Pacific, like in Hawaii. So all the research that was conducted in Hawaii, unless put into the context of a heavily degraded ecosystem by human activities, it would be misleading, because the coral reefs of Hawaii can tell us about how a degraded coral reef works, but it cannot tell us about what the Pacific full and complete coral reef looks like. So we found that this pattern where the predators account for most of the biomass was prevalent across the Pacific. We found that this inverted biomass pyramid happened everywhere where there had been no fishing. So the untouched coral reef in the Pacific shows an inverted biomass pyramid, which is very different from what we learned from textbooks. So after going to this place, the first thing we were tempted to do was to just rip off those pages from those textbooks. The second thing we learned by going to these places is that the habitat, the seafloor, is covered by a very complex three-dimensional matrix. And you could say, well, this is a no-brainer, right? The coral reefs, of course, are three-dimensionally complex. They are formed by animals. But right now, if a student started working in the Caribbean, they would find that the coral cover in most reefs is between 5 and 10% of the bottom. In these places in the Pacific, we have 80 to 90% of the bottom covered by live coral. So we cannot underestimate how much of that three-dimensional structure, which is the basis for the entire ecosystem, we have lost. Not only on coral reefs, but also on seagrass beds, Mediterranean rocky reefs, in kelp forest also, and other ecosystems. The third thing we learn is that the species that modify the environment, that are ecosystem engineers, are super abundant. This is an example from that same coral reef in the Marshall Islands. These are bumphead parrotfish. They can grow up to longer than a meter. Every one of these, what they do is they eat algae, they crunch corals also. And the cloud of sand you see, that is the feces of those fish. Every one of these adult bumphead parrotfish produces 5.5 tons of sand every year. They have disappeared in most places, but in the places where they are abundant, they are really abundant. There is one place in Palau that still holds a spawning aggregation where the adults aggregate to reproduce at a specific location around the full moons. And you can see a few thousand. It's absolutely extraordinary. So when you have a few thousand fish times 5.5 tons each, it's a lot of sand. So much of the sand in these islands, on these coral atolls, is formed by the activity of the parrotfish. And having sand on the island allows the green turtles to nest, and also provides the habitat for all these plants and shrubs and grasses that then also are going to be part of the three-dimensional structure that will allow the seabirds to nest there. Then seabirds will go out tens or hundreds of miles to catch fish that are brought to the surface by schools of tuna. And then they will return with those fish to feed the chicks. And some of these chicks, as they try to fly, as they learn to fly, some will fall into these coral lagoons and they will be eaten by the reef sharks. So there is this huge conveyor belt of energy that in this particular example is made possible by the activity of one group of fishes, the parrotfish, that eat algae and also scrape some of the coral. So these ecosystem engineers have disappeared from most ecosystems, from most coral reefs that are inhabited and fished. As the ecosystem becomes pristine also, the recycling becomes prevalent. These little black sausages that you see at the bottom of the photo are sea cucumbers. Sea cucumbers make a living out of ingesting sand, eating all the bacteria and little microorganisms that live on the sand, and then pooping little sausages of clean sand. Their activity is so important that in some places like in Heron Island, in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, it's a small island, just a couple of square miles of habitat. The sea cucumbers process every year a volume of sand that is about the volume of 5 Eiffel Towers. And we have learned only from a study last year that the cleaning activity of the sand produced by these recyclers, but these species that eat detritus, cleans the sand and reduces the prevalence of disease in corals. The problem is that in most of the Pacific, these sea cucumbers, also called bêche de mer, have been eliminated. The Chinese distant water fleet is vacuuming up the sea cucumbers from all those reefs. So by doing that, by removing the recyclers, actually we are imperiling the health of the corals, which in turn is the basic the basis for the entire ecosystem. So that's something else that we learned, that the recycling is more and more important in these untouched ecosystems. These places have also food webs that are really long. In the Caribbean, for example, you would have a little damselfish that eats algae, eaten by a small basslet or a grouper, and then in most places, if you're lucky, you have a shark. That would be a three-step food chain, three lengths of the food chain. In these untouched ecosystems, we have 5 or more, especially in places with the killer whales and the orcas are now arriving. We can get up to 6. So these food webs are not only really large and long, but also they are more stable. They are less likely to have this volatility that we see in many other places. And this is an example of a food web, simplified food web that we put together for a few years ago, 20 years ago, for the Caribbean, where every circle around this ellipse is a species or a species group. And every line, there are lots of thin lines. Every line is the interaction between the 2 species, who eats who. Most of the lines you cannot see, they are very thin, but the thick lines are the ones that are the most important here. They are the strongest interaction in between species. And most of the thick lines originate from these top predators that are missing in the Caribbean, in most places in the Pacific. But in these untouched ocean ecosystems, the predators are the ones that provide the stability. If you remove those nodes with the strong interactions, then the whole thing collapses. And we have been looking at the large animals and the food web, but what about the smallest animals, the microbes, right? In coral reefs, even within a single coral reef polyp, a single individual, we have algae that live in symbiosis with the coral and gives it their color. We have other types of algae that live inside the skeleton of the coral. We have bacteria, archaea, viruses. It's a very complex micro ecosystem. It's a holobiont. And what we found by going to these places is that a healthy microbial ecosystem has nothing to do with the microbial ecosystem that we are used to in places with people. This is an example of, again, that same coral reef atoll in the Marshall Islands. All of these are giant clams. These densities of giant clams are absolutely unheard of in most of the Pacific because people have killed them for food mostly and ornamental purposes. And these giant clams filter the water. They keep the water clean. In 2005, I conducted an expedition to the Line Islands, and we were able to go to 4 different islands along a gradient of human pressure. That was a perfectly natural experiment to look at what happens when we go from the untouched ecosystem to places with people. So as you can see here, when we go from, on the left, from 0 people to a place with 20 people, 1,500 and 5,000, on the left, you can see this is the number of bacteria and archaea, the number of the bacterial counts. In the place without people, the abundance, the concentration of bacteria in the water is 10 times lower than in a place with only 5,000 people. To the right, same thing with viruses, because we found that there are about 10 viruses per bacterium in these places. But when we look at, okay, what type of bacteria are there, the green bacteria are good ones that produce photosynthesis. The purple ones are the ones that eat other bacteria, and the white ones are the bad bugs. These are pathogens, human pathogens, including Vibrio, the genus of bacteria that produces cholera in humans, which is prevalent in some tropical islands where the giant clams have been completely eliminated from the lagoons. So what we see is that the microbial ecosystem not only becomes 10 times more abundant, but what they do completely changes. A shift from very small bacteria that do photosynthesis, that do like the plants on the land, to an ecosystem where most of the bacteria are eating other bacteria or actually affecting human health. And this is something that we couldn't have known unless we have been to these untouched ecosystems. very important not only for the coral reef ecosystem, but also for human health. And by looking at all these islands and more, we found that the more coral you have, the lower the prevalence of disease there is. So, and to the left of this graph, in places that are inhabited, even with just 1,500 or 5,000 people, there is less coral cover, and the prevalence of bacteria goes, off the charts. Why is that? When we have a reef with 80% of the bottom covered by corals, well, this is partly because there are all these herbivores like the parrotfish, sea urchins, and surgeonfish that keep the algae in check. But in a place where we have left coral, we have lost coral, then this seaweed, like in the Caribbean, when after a hurricane or a bleaching event, the seaweed, these fleshy algae immediately take over the space left by the dead corals. And once the algae are there, they are there to stay, because the corals cannot compete with the algae. The algae, in addition, in these tropical places, produce so many sugars, so many carbs, that they exude this liquid candy into the water. And that liquid candy is a great source of food for some of the microbes that live on and in the corals. And then we can have an imbalance where the bad bacteria are going to explode in numbers and produce coral disease, killing the coral. That loss of coral releases some space that then can be occupied by the seaweed, which produces more sugars that will produce more coral disease, and so on and so forth. So it's a negative loop there. It's a perverse circle that will end up diminishing the amount of coral, and with it, the health of the entire ecosystem. So the healthy microbial ecosystems are absolutely key. And something very important is that the fact that there were more bacteria in the water with just 5,000 people was not because of human waste. But we did some studies using stable isotopes, and we didn't find a human signal in these atolls. What happened is that the overfishing of all these fish, fishing down the food web, actually created all these changes in the ecosystem, which are very difficult to understand, that ended up in this complete shift in the microbial ecosystem, which in turn affects the coral, etc. So it is the destruction of that food web that is causing all these effects, cascade effects. Also, these places are much more resilient. You can say, well, yes, places with more coral are more resilient because the coral is there, but there is nothing we can do about ocean warming. And I have an answer for this. We studied the coral reefs of the Southern Line Islands in Kiribati in the South Pacific. And these were places like the ones in the atoll I showed you before. Sharks off the charts, lots of predators, lots of parrotfish, 80%, 90% in some places of the bottom was covered by live coral. Yet, during the strongest marine heat wave we've seen in the Pacific, in that part of the Pacific, in 2015, 2016, during that El Nino year, half of the corals died. These are cauliflower corals. They are the ones that were most affected. And you see this pink crust on top of the corals. These are encrusting algae that grow, forming like this thin limestone crust. They are the ones that resist the grazing by the parrotfish. So the parrotfish and the surgeonfish, the fish here have prevented the seaweed, the fleshy algae, to overgrow the dead coral. So they have kept this surface clean. My colleagues thought that, well, there is no hope for the coral reefs anymore. Even the most pristine place has lost half of the corals. They are toast. But I said, no, let's give the place a few years and let's go back, because if biodiversity fosters resilience, as we have seen in other places and on the land, this is the place to test it. COVID happened, so we had to wait 4 years. But when we returned, we went from a reef that was half dead to a reef that had fully recovered, only 5 years later. Part of this is because the place had all these fish, the food web was intact and was able to provide that resilience. Now we're also looking at the genetic composition, at the genome of the reef, because one question is why the reef recovered, but the other one is why half of the reef didn't die, right? That's also very, very important. But this is something that we have seen in other places. We saw the same thing on the Marshall Islands, where these beautiful stands of elkhorn-like coral were devastated by that marine heat wave, but those dead skeletons are clean of seaweed and full with millions of baby corals that are coming back. So the resilience is absolutely phenomenal in untouched marine ecosystems. So these are some of the things that we have learned, that we have been able to use to reset our baseline of what's natural by going to these remote and near pristine places. More large animals than we ever thought. I remember when we published our first study on the inverted biomass pyramid, well-known coral reef researcher sent me an email saying, yes, you believe in this. Some people also believe in the Transformers, in this science fiction movie. But then I showed him a photo of the 30 sharks in one frame on the coral reef. And, we have seen this everywhere. It's hard even for scientists to acknowledge that we have that shifting baseline, that we really don't know about the systems unless we are able to see one that is untouched and complete. And everything that we've talked about, more predators, this inverted biomass pyramid, the complexity of the habitat formed by a species, the biogenic habitat, the importance of recycling, the very complex food webs, the resilience, the healthy microbial ecosystems, all of this fits precisely with the theory of ecological succession. This is what we would expect to see increase along ecological succession. When one place is, when the human activities are abated in one place, like in a protected area, and places are allowed to recover, this ecosystem would irreversibly shift towards a state that is closer to this. I'm going to stop here and start the Q&A, but I wanted to share some of the findings that we have obtained by going to some of these wonderful, wild places since 2009, since I started Pristine Seas after leaving academia.
Thank you so much, Enric. Really interesting insights, stunning images as well. And thank you for introducing me to that sense of a shifting baseline syndrome, that what some scientists may think of as natural, has already been degraded. That was kind of the message that I got there. And just to jump straight to questions, a quick reminder to all of you watching, we are live right now. If you have a question you'd like to put to Enric off the back of that, do add it to the Q&A tab below. I will endeavor to select as many as I can and put some of them to you in our next kind of 40 minutes together. What I'd love to try to do, Enric, during this is focus on drawing out some strategies, some scalable, some practical strategies to restore degraded marine ecosystems. Maybe the practical strategies that can be taken by local communities, by policymakers, by the wider public as well, including those people who are watching live. But let's jump straight into a question. I saw one from Molly Jeans, who says it links to the coral reef research that you were talking about and this shifting baseline syndrome. Molly asks, are most studies conducted in populated areas / degraded reefs because they are more accessible? And, great follow-up, would having more studies on these untouched coral reefs contribute to their demise?
The first question is indeed. Places in the Caribbean, Florida Keys, are very easy to access. It is cheap. Scientists are mostly on a shoestring budget. And it is very expensive to organize expeditions to these very remote places. So yes, accessibility has contributed to the vast dominance of studies of degraded places. And the second one, if knowing more about these places will contribute to their demise, this is something that we thought a lot in the beginning when we started Pristine Seas. Some people told us, don't go to these places, don't show these places to the world. Let's hope that if nobody knows about them, they will be untouched. The problem is that if I know about these places, the sophisticated fishing fleets of Europe, China, Taiwan, Korea, they know about these places too, right? The fishing vessels now have technology that is so extraordinary. They are able to have these buoys drifting in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There are 100,000 of them with a GPS tracker, and they have a fish finder that is able to identify when the tuna schools aggregate. Fish love to aggregate around floating objects in the open ocean. When the tuna schools aggregate below these floating objects, this fish finder is able to estimate how many fish of what species and the length. So the operator of those big fishing vessels can decide, oh, the biomass of tuna under this one, which is only 100 miles away, is bigger than the one that is 20 miles away. So they are able to target those schools precisely. When these vessels get close to these reefs, they also sometimes they give a free day to the crew so they can catch sharks, which is illegal in most places, but that shark per pound provides more income than the tuna. So these reefs, these distant water fleets are targeting these places. But what we have seen is that by working with governments to get these places protected as no-take areas, that provides a buffer. So the fishing vessels cannot get as close to those reefs as before. And our studies using satellite data showing that most of these no-take areas successfully prevent industrial fishing.
A couple of things I can jump off that with then. So talking about these protected areas, when I introduced you, I mentioned that you founded National Geographic's Pristine Seas initiative, now established 29 marine protected areas, MPAs, essentially the ocean equivalent of national parks, kind of in a way. And you talking there about the importance of no-take and protected areas. There's a great question from Marissa Ensor, who says, I understand that Spain, her country of birth, became the first EU country to ratify the High Seas Treaty. She asks, do you have any thoughts on the potential significance of this treaty for the protection of ocean ecosystems?
Yes, there are two oceans. For those who are not familiar, the exclusive economic zones of countries, which are 200 nautical miles from shore. And those waters they are the responsibility of coastal countries. They have the authority to exploit the resources on those waters. That's about 40% of the ocean. The rest of the ocean, the other 60%, is what we call the high seas, or international waters beyond national jurisdiction, that belong to nobody and belong to everybody. So as you can imagine, it's the Wild West, because who is enforcing illegal activities in the high seas? There was no legal instrument for countries to create protected areas in the high seas. Any country can create protected areas, these national parks in the sea, in their own waters. But when it comes to the high seas, there was a big gap there. When the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea was signed in 1982, there was no talk about ocean warming or genetic resources or overexploitation of the high seas. So there is this new legally binding instrument that now 20 countries have ratified, that when it's ratified by 60 countries, is going to become part of the international law. And these 60 countries, plus whoever else joins, will be able to use this instrument to create protected areas in the high seas. That's phenomenal, because for the first time, we'll be able to effectively protect parts of the largest part of the ocean. Now, we mostly work in exclusive economic zones of countries. Why? Because the threat that is easiest to abate with protection is overfishing. We can close areas from fishing, and we can prevent fishing from happening there. We cannot prevent the ocean from becoming warmer in that part of the world, right? So when we think about the fishing in the high seas, we found that only 4% of the global fishing catch comes from the high seas. So 96% of the problem that is most easily abatable by protected areas is within the exclusive economic zones of countries, within the 200 miles. This is why, for us, the top priority is those 200 miles.
And on that, so good question. Pedro Juan Correa Asaza says, how can Pristine Seas ensure that its work leads to long-term, sustainable territorial and political management for the protection and conservation of these ecosystems?
Well, indeed, that's the key, to make sure that the place is not only designated by law, but is actually effectively managed. So we work with government agencies, we work with local NGOs, and also big partners like the Bezos Earth Fund, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and others, to ensure that once these places are protected, there is a sustainable financing plan. So these places will have an annual budget to be able to be managed. And the cost of enforcing these areas has become so much cheaper thanks to satellite technology. Now, with a publicly available, non-military satellite data, we can track all these industrial fishing vessels, including the dark ones. So most of them have this satellite transponder. The insurance companies want to know where the boats are, and for safety, it's important for them to know where they are. But we know that when a squid fishing vessel from China approached the edge of the exclusive economic zone, the EEZ of Argentina, they turn off the transponder and they come into Argentinian waters not to be detected, right? But now we are able to detect those vessels also because we have new satellite data that allow us to take photographs of part of the ocean with radars or with lights at night to know how many dark vessels there are. So right now that has simplified the monitoring. Global Fishing Watch is this great organization that has the latest and best technology to be able to track all these vessels. So that's the key. And we make sure that not only the areas are designated by law, but also there is a plan for enforcement into the future. And the good thing is that after the fishing industry realizes the benefits of these protected areas, right? Once they realize, then they are great supporters. And in the best enforcement come from local areas where it is smaller protected areas near shore, where local communities benefit from these protected areas through better fishing around them because there is a spillover of fish or because of tourism opportunities. Then they make sure that these places are well protected into the future.
Talking technology, and I saw a couple of questions come in about machine learning, AI. Here's one from Camilla Chi. How do you think artificial intelligence and data analysis can improve ocean conservation and marine protected areas?
Oh, it's phenomenal applications, and it's already working. It's already being used. Global Fishing Watch, for example, uses machine learning algorithms and AI to be able to know if imagine this fishing vessels have this automated identification system, right, or vessel monitoring system. So they have this box that transmit a signal to the satellite, so the owners can know where the boat is. So the vessel transmits the signal every few seconds, right? So that's very easy to detect. We know where the boat is. But let's say that vessel is, going this way and does like this and then goes straight and around. How to know if the vessel is fishing or is just transiting? Well, now we have billions of data points. And we know that a bottom trawler, when it's trawling the bottom of the ocean, is doing a path that is very different from a long liner that is setting long lines, or a purse seiner that is putting a net around schools of tuna, right? So we now have so many billions of data points that these machine learning algorithms have able to identify if a vessel is just transiting, sailing, or if it's fishing. And because of the type of movement the vessel is doing, we can know if it's setting long lines, it is trawling the bottom of the ocean, etc., etc. And Global Fishing Watch has really, I encourage everybody to go to globalfishingwatch.org and look at the global map, and you will be able to see how this technology is working, and it's already used by governments to enforce marine protected areas.
Fascinating. All right, cool. I'm just going to stick with the kind of protection thread at the moment because there's lots of questions coming in on it. We've talked a little bit about High Seas Treaty. We've started to talk about pristine seas. Let's just touch on the 30 by 30 target, the aim to protect at least 30% of the world's land and ocean areas by 2030. Miriam Fernandez Bartonacel says, how far are we from the 30 by 30 protection target? Enric, how do you think it's going?
We are far. The governments, the countries of the world agreed to 30 by 30 in November 2022 at the UN Convention on Biodiversity, the COP15, the Conference of the Parties. But today, only 8% of the ocean is under some kind of protection. And most of these areas allow industrial fishing, actually. Only 3% of the ocean is fully protected from fishing, which is almost nothing. So what we need to do is to fill the gap. We need to quadruple ocean protection from that 8 to 30% in the next 6 years. And we also need to ensure that all these areas that now are called protected, but allow industrial fishing, are strengthened. So industrial fishing is not compatible with conservation. Many countries have created big areas, including in Europe. There are all these Natura 2000 areas that are huge, but they have no regulations. They are no different from the day before they were designated by law. So in some cases in Northern Europe, we see these bottom trawlers with these huge and heavy nets that plow the sea floor in the search for just a few species of fish and shrimp and destroy everything else in the way churning the sediment and producing enormous CO2 emissions. These vessels actually are fishing more inside marine protected areas than outside. What happens then? That the abundance of the vulnerable species that the protected areas are supposed to protect, like sharks, rays, skates, the abundance of those vulnerable species is lower inside the protected areas than outside. It doesn't make any sense. So we need to fill that gap to 30%, but also we need to make sure that the protected areas we have today are truly protected and deliver the conservation outcomes that they were supposed to be working for.
How do you convince fishers that protecting certain areas will ultimately benefit them? It's a great question from Jorge Cortez that kind of takes us nicely from what you just said.
Well, I don't need to convince them. Other fishers convince them. We have fishers from all around the world. So what happens here is that there's this myth that we cannot protect more of the ocean because we need to catch more fish to feed more people, right? Well, the global fishing catch of wild fish has been declining since 1995. Yet today, only 3% of the ocean is protected truly from fishing. So that decline in the catch is not because of protection, it's because of overfishing. The worst enemy of fishing is overfishing, not protection. And what we have seen is that when you protect an area, when you're fishing, it doesn't matter how well you manage. What you're doing is depleting the population, more or less. And they tell you, go and catch the big fish, but don't kill the babies, right? Let's keep the babies. But there are very few places in the world where actually the big fish are respected. And what happens? The big fish, when a fish increases in length in 1 dimension, it increases in volume in 3 dimensions. So the number of eggs that the female can harbor increases by the power of the cube. It's exponential increase. In most places, the exponential increase never occurs because the big fish are caught first. So the population of fish that is managed produces a reproductive output that is so much lower than they could have. And the only place where there are these very large females and enough of them is in these no-take areas. So the no-take areas have a reproductive potential that is so huge that not only replenish the areas inside these the protected areas and allow these fish to grow like with compound interest, let's say, but also they produce so many eggs, larvae, and even adult fish that many of them spill over the boundaries of these protected areas. And that spillover, we have seen examples from small species and small reserves to huge reserves and species that move long distances. That spillover actually helps the fishers catch more with less cost and get bigger profits. So when fishers realize that, they want more. And when fishers listen to other fishers saying that, so wow, maybe we should try.
So, you said 3% is kind of our current figure. With 30 by 30, we're aiming for 30%. Let's kind of go through some of the practical actions that need to be taken to get that, to increase that number. As I said, let's break this down. Let's start with local communities. Then let's go to policymakers. Then if we can, we'll touch on wider public. There are a number of questions I've got about local communities. Carly Cocciardi says, I understand that working with local communities is a key part of Pristine Sea's approach to establishing MPAs. When coming in as an external organisation with the aim of strengthening protection, what do you find are the most crucial factors to consider in building trust and ensuring meaningful collaboration, especially when working, we've just touched on the fishing industry, but let's start there. How do you build those
Yeah.
relationships? And then after that, I'll follow up with what part do local communities play?
Yes. Well, no, we go both to places without people, like those atolls in the Marshall Islands, and places with people. And now we don't go to any place where we are not invited. Right? There is word of mouth saying, "Wow, look at what happened in Chile or in Niue." And so we want to do something similar, and they invite us to go. And we spend a lot of time before we even go to the place with our vessel to do any research, always in collaboration with local communities and local organizations and government agencies. We always spend time just visiting and listening, right? Is the basics of working with local communities fairly and properly. But when it comes to what people can do, what you can do to get these places protected, as you were mentioning, at the community level, every protected area has been created because one person thought of it. It's not because they came out of an algorithm, right? No, every single protected area in the world has been created because at least one person thought about it, and then that person rallied their community behind. It could be people within a government agency or within a community. An example that I love is in Cabo Pulmo in Mexico, in the Sea of Cortez. There was a place that was so depleted. The local fishermen were so upset with not having enough fish to catch that they themselves decided to ask the Mexican government to create a no-take area, a national park. And the government, and they work with scientists to make a proposal, and the government created a 70 square kilometer, it's small, 70 square kilometer national park with no fishing. What happened? We went there in the beginning and measured the baseline. We went back 10 years later, and we saw the largest recovery of fish anywhere in the world. It went back to pristine with sharks and big groupers, snappers. It's extraordinary. And now those visionary fishermen are making much more money by taking divers to see the fish. They can sell the fish, the same fish, they can sell it over and over and over and over. If you catch the fish, you can sell it once only, right? So these fishermen are now the best messengers for other fishing communities in Mexico, so they can do the same. And the fishermen around, the communities around, are catching more because of the spillover from the park. So it was one family. It was basically two fishermen who came up with the idea, and it happened. And now it's one of the best examples in the world of effective, equitable coastal marine protected areas that benefit tourism, fishery, create jobs, brings in revenue, etc. So if you could be that person, do it. You could be a person. You could be a person who starts the protection of your ocean backyard. It always starts with someone.
I love that. Thank you. Sarah Blakesley asks a question that's going to raise a bit of attention here, I guess. She says, given that the greater proportion of humans in the reef areas correlates to unhealthier ocean ecosystems, what recommendations do you have for local people to support healthier coral ecosystems?
Yeah, it's protect part of them, right? Because we're talking about different scales. We have been to some of these places that are remote, around very remote islands, with this greater ecosystem that goes from the reef to the deep to offshore. And in places that are inhabited, the countries have the ability, it's more politically feasible to protect these huge areas that protect an ecosystem that is like the Yellowstones or the Serengetis of the ocean, right? It's the larger ecosystem. But also we have great examples where communities have protected only 10% or 20 or 30% of their reefs, and that has helped to replenish the rest. There are management techniques like the Rahui in Polynesia, where it's like crop rotation. They close a place for 5 years, and they open it up to fishing, and they closed another area to let it grow back. Palau has the bull. The bull is a very ancient tradition where they understood that if they fished the groupers or the bumphead parrotfish or the snappers, when they aggregate to reproduce in these massive aggregations around the full moons, they would end up with no fish real soon. So they made it taboo to fish the spawning aggregation, right? So there are all these techniques. They don't have to protect the entire reef. If they protect parts of the reef that are productive, that will help to replenish the rest, that's the solution that has worked in many places around the world.
Sticking with this kind of local impacts, McKenna Riley says many countries experiencing the most extreme climate impacts have people who rely on small scale fisheries. You mentioned no take areas earlier. She asks, do you think they really are the best solution for places like that?
Absolutely. There are global threats and local threats. The global threats, a community cannot abate, cannot do anything about, right? We're talking about global warming, ocean warming, acidification. But the local threats are local pollution that damages the reefs, coastal development, overfishing. These things are the easiest threats to manage and to stop, right? And of all the techniques that are out there, no take marine protected areas, fully protected areas, are the ones that have shown the greatest and fastest recovery of marine life and all the benefits it provides to people. But they are not the panacea, right? They are not the only solution. Of course, the protected area cannot make the water cooler, but it can help foster resilience and have the ecosystem bounce back like we saw in the Line Islands if all these direct threats are abated. So you are more likely to deal with the flu if you are in general good shape. But if you have issues with your lungs and kidney and liver, and then you get COVID, you are going to be in a much worse position. So by keeping the places as healthy as possible, by abating the threats that we can control locally, that provides that resilience against the global threats, while hopefully the world figures out how to get us to carbon neutrality, which is absolutely key. If emissions continue increasing, the prospects for coral reefs are really, really dire.
Let's jump up on that then. It was the question that was always going to come up. We're going to step up a level to kind of policy, but let's go even higher. Gary Sierek has asked, what impact could Trump pulling out of Paris and COP have on ocean fisheries, conservation, etc.? Tough question, I know, early days.
Yes, the US being out of the Paris Climate Agreement is really bad news for the world, because as you probably know, there are efforts by states here in the US, like California, who are saying, no, we're going to stick to our commitments anyway, right? And we're going to reduce emissions as we plan. The problem is that relaxation of the standards, or the pulling out of the climate agreement, has given a green light to corporations, like the banks, the big banks also recently abandoned their commitments to reduce emissions, to mitigate climate change. And other countries see, well, the United States is not doing anything, being one of the biggest polluters. Why should we, right? So the decision by the United States is definitely going to have global repercussions. I don't think there is anything that one can do at the personal level, right? We have 4 years of this administration, but what we can do is continue working locally, because the fishing communities living on the coast of Ireland or Mozambique, they still need to catch the fish and sell it and eat it, right? And it is the actions at that level, at the local level, but also at the national level, that are going to continue helping the ocean to provide for their people. So there is nothing that the local community can do at that level. Governments, as you know, governments are changing also their positions. The European Union is not, but in terms of global warming, things are not going to get better. So this is one more reason why we need to continue protecting as much of the ocean as we can to buy time.
On that policymaker level, then, I suppose, are the oceans given enough attention by policymakers? But here's a specific one by Andre Demens-Potvin, who says, I understand that most of the overfishing takes place in exclusive economic zones, but how concerned are you about the deep sea ocean mining being aggressively lobbied in international waters, given that we're just starting to understand how much energy flows and how is recycled between different depth levels? Talk to that a little bit, Enric. Like, what
Yes.
is the tension there? What are policymakers doing? What are they not doing? How can things be improved?
Deep sea mining is a huge issue, indeed. So there are, usually the offshore ocean has been exploited for fish and for oil. But now there is this increasing interest in metals that are in the deep sea at concentration that are much larger than on the land. And there are areas like hydrothermal vents with these seeps that come from inside the crust that have some metals that are crushed around seamounts that have lots of nickel, manganese, cobalt. And then there are these polymetallic nodules. There are these balls.
The sea potatoes.
Like sea potatoes.
Yeah.
That have been, these are metals in the deep sea that have been growing, accreting, growing like onion layers around little sand or stones, excuse me, for millions of years. Right? So these sea potatoes have concentrations of some of these metals that are enormous. So from a mining point of view, if these potatoes were on the land, we could go and pick them up, right? And we wouldn't have to create these huge pits to destroy the earth to mine them. But when you have these sea potatoes at 4,000 meters deep, that's different. We cannot go at 4,000 meters and pick them like potatoes. That requires machines that look like Mad Max trucks. They have to scrape the bottom of the ocean with the sediment and the potatoes. They send the nodules to a ship where they are filtered, and the sediment and lots of toxic elements in it also then are released back to the ocean, potentially creating plumes of sediment that would be hundreds of square kilometers long. There is basically one company from Canada that is pushing this and has convinced 2 Pacific Island nations to push the United Nations for exploration licenses. Most of these nodules are in the high seas, as we mentioned before, international waters. And there is something called the International Seabed Authority based in Jamaica. That is the UN agency that is supposed to regulate mining in the deep sea. Most countries oppose mining in the deep sea. The countries in the Pacific that are reliant on tuna fishing oppose the mining in the deep sea because they know the effects that it would have in the entire ecosystem. But it is the corporate greed and the promise of billions of dollars by doing nothing other than just allowing this activity to happen that is threatening one of the most unknown ecosystems on the planet. It is so unknown that only last year, scientists found that these deep sea potatoes produce oxygen like the trees on the land, because all this metallic combination in these potatoes at that depth and with seawater produces electrolysis, and one of the byproducts is oxygen.
Incredible. Yeah.
We had no idea. So it's like, oh, to grab some minerals, we're going to raise the entire Amazonian forest. No, we don't know enough. So this is why we should be very cautious about embarking in a new gold rush in the deep sea.
Absolutely. Sadly, we only have about 4 minutes left before my final question, so I'm going to try to get through a couple. Widening out even further, you yourself have been God, your list of awards, your list of accolades are very long throughout your career, from a Prince Albert the First Grand Medal for your work advancing ocean protection, an Emmy for one of your many nature documentaries. Let's talk about the media. You know, a lot of work you do is capturing and sharing stunning content. How important do you think that media work is alongside the research and conservation work?
Well, when I was in academia, I thought that data information was the most important thing. And when I left and I had to deal with policy making, I realized that the most important thing is the media. The most important thing is the heart. Sometimes we're lucky that we take presidents, prime ministers, local chiefs underwater with our submersible. It's acrylic bubble, you're sitting comfortably and you see 360. And that is a transformative experience for anybody. But when we cannot take the leaders with us, then we bring the place to them. And this is why we produce these pristine National Geographic documentaries. And that's the most important thing. Only if people don't know about something, they are not going to be interested in protecting it. And if people fall in love with these places, it is much more likely that they will be keen to do something. So first, we try to reach to the heart to make those leaders fall in love with these places in person or through our media. And then when they feel compelled to do something about it, then we come with scientific and economic research to show that this is not only important, but it's actually economically beneficial.
And once you've captured the heart of the wider public through that incredible media content, which is well worth a watch if anyone watching this hasn't gone to see that National Geographic content, how do you then inspire, like what action do you want to inspire in the wider public with that content?
All of our films so far have been focused at protecting one place. And either because we found an opportunity or because the government invited us to fill gaps and help them support their vision to protect specific places. So sometimes we have produced media for just a small amount of people, right? So watching a documentary, if you are in Brazil and you're watching a documentary about the Marshall Islands, I don't think there is much you can do about it. But for the Marshallese, it is very important to know that they have something that is even better than they thought, that they expected. And there is this reconnecting people, because on our expeditions, we always have local scientists, local students, and our films are, we give these people a megaphone. Our films, it is they are able to convey their vision about the place, their hopes. Right. So and when we go to these places with our scuba diving, and also especially with the submersible, when we go deep, we are co-exploring, co-discovering with people about parts of the ecosystem that they didn't know about because they didn't have the means to go deep, for example. So for us, the key is to reconnect people with their homeland, with their sea land, and to reinstate that sense of pride about their marine territory. And when you see the reaction of people, when they see themselves, when they see their friends, when they see people they know on screen, exploring and discovering these amazing things that they didn't know about, it's always emotional. It's actual magic in there.
Just finally, before my final question, let's bring it back to the coral. Helena Savari asks, what do you think coral reef ecosystems will look like in 100, 1,000 years from now? The question is if we're not able to reduce global warming. And I think, what do you said we're at 3%. We need to increase that. What happens? I won't say what happens if we don't, because we know the extension of that. But what are you hoping you'll see in those kind of benchmark periods?
Yeah, well, 1,000 years, I wouldn't dare to forecast what will happen, but this century, for sure, if we are not able to reduce dramatically carbon emissions, those marine heat waves are going to happen more and more frequently. If coral reefs that are protected had the time to recover in between, we would have coral reefs that are closer to what we know now. But if, like in Australia, for example, these marine heat waves are coming every year, the corals will never have time to recover, right? So at the scale that we're talking about of all the coral reefs of the world, the coral reefs of the future, we already know, are going to be very different from those in the past. We can recover part of that. and we can maybe for some evolutionary reason or some technology, maybe some corals will be more resistant than others and they will dominate. But there is no future for coral reefs and all the benefits that people get from them unless we do two things. One is, again, reduce emissions dramatically. This is a sine qua non. And two, to protect at least a third of them so we can bring back not just the corals, but all the life that is associated with them. But I'd like to end with a hopeful note, because despite all the problems, we know, and I have seen it with my own eyes hundreds of times, we know that if we give the ocean space, the ocean bounces back to life spectacularly, faster than we ever imagined. That's what gives me hope.
And there's lots of people asking in the chat, Enric, what can they do? You know, they're not the local community, they're not the policymakers, they're individuals, a lot of scientists watching. What can they do?
I would say apply what you are good at. What's your passion? Playing the guitar or doing science or making films? Use that. You know, we need the filmmakers, the scientists, the economists, the policy experts, the strategic communications people. We need all of those skills together to be able to get these places protected, right? So if you have identified a place in your ocean backyard, or a place that you do research at that you love, any place that you really love and you want to see restored, then use your skills and bring all the other skills that you don't have. You know, build a team and just do it. We have done it. It can be done. And again, as I said, every marine protected area, especially in coastal areas, has been created because at least one person thought that was a good idea. So it's never too late to start. Just do it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That is all the time we've got today. Enric, is there anything else you want to leave us with? You know, you've shared some fantastic research. You've kind of inspired us all. Is there one final takeaway, a message to either the scientific community, the agencies, the policymakers, colleagues, peers? What would you like to say? Final words.
Reshift your baseline. You know, bringing back the ocean to life. Bringing the ocean back to life is possible. We can revive the ocean together. So, you know, don't let the status quo discourage you. It's been done. There are countries that have protected already more than 30% already, or 30% like Palau, Niue, Seychelles, Chile, and other countries, Gabon. It can be done. It can be done, right? So if these countries have done it, countries that are the global south, that they rely on a healthy ocean, they rely on fishing. If they have done it, there is no reason why any other country shouldn't do it. And again, it all starts with one private citizen who is passionate about it and hopefully obsessed about it and just makes it happen. So I would encourage all of you to use your passion to achieve your purpose.
Thank you so much, Dr. Enric Sala, for your experience, your journey, your optimism with us today. It's very much appreciated. Thank you to all of you who are watching as well. For now, we need to say goodbye. Thank you again to Enric. I really appreciate that. What a fantastic conversation. What a brilliant virtual forum. Thank you to all of you for joining us as well. We'll see you soon. Bye.